This episode of the Beauty by ABIC podcast is brought to you by the Aesthetic and Beauty Industry Council. Hello and welcome to the Beauty by ABIC podcast, your online support community for the aesthetic and beauty industry. Here, we are strengthening and unifying the industry through representation, innovation, and education. This is a platform created and dedicated to the aesthetic and beauty industry, valuing unity and advancement. We serve to represent, support, and inspire you by connecting you with industry experts, expanding your knowledge through educational pieces, and bringing you the latest industry news. This is Beauty by ABIC. Welcome. I'm Stephanie Miller, your host, and today's guest is Kelly Cunningham, Managing Director and Co-founder of Your Leasing Co. Your Leasing Co is an ABIC Supplier Member which provides an expert commercial leasing service exclusively to tenants and ABIC members that gives them access to the same market data and negotiation advantages typically reserved for landlords. Managing Director Kelly Cunningham is a highly skilled commercial property consultant and tenant representation expert who brings over 25 years of industry experience. Kelly is a licensed real estate agent and has a broad background in retail and commercial leasing, management of regional shopping centre assets, and a specialisation in retail and commercial leasing. Kelly is well regarded for her expertise in negotiating leases and getting the absolute best results for her clients. She has also consulted to legal firms in the capacity of an expert witness in relation to retail leasing litigation. Here to help us with our leasing negotiation skills and to discuss the power play of the landlord and tenant relationship. From Your Leasing Co, today we welcome leasing expert Kelly Cunningham. Hello, Kelly, and welcome to the Beauty by ABIC podcast. How are you?
I'm good, thanks.
It's so nice to have you on the podcast. We have so many exciting things to talk about today, which can save a business owner quite a lot of money and quite a lot of heartache, actually. So today we're actually talking about all things landlords and leasing. So let's start off. We always start our podcast by finding out a little bit about our guest. And today we're going to ask you the same question we ask everybody. How did you actually get started in leasing and property industry?
Look, I started working as a young person when I came back from travelling overseas, and I came back and I wanted to work in retail real estate, and I got an opportunity to work in the management office of a shopping centre. And I found that really fascinating, and I found out a lot about managing a shopping centre that most people who shop don't even understand has to go on behind the scenes. And I found it really fascinating, and there's so many moving parts. So I sort of got started in the property business by taking on a role in a shopping centre, and then sort of evolved a whole bunch of roles in shopping centre management, from operations to marketing to the legal stuff to managing centres, and all the things that are involved in running a shopping centre, which is like running a really big business with sort of 200 staff or however many tenants we've got in the centre. So it gave me a very, very good overall understanding of the retail industry, and in particular, business and all the things that businesses have to juggle in order to succeed and survive, really. So, yeah, that's how I sort of got into it.
Well, that sounds like a very big job, extremely, huge amount of responsibility, extremely complicated to deal with and negotiate with so many different parties at the same time. I suppose that's where you honed your negotiation skills.
That's right. I mean, there are lots of parties and there are lots of stakeholders in all, there's not only the landlord and the tenant, but there's the customers, and there's a whole bunch of people that need to be kept satisfied, when you've got a small business. So running a shopping centre is like running a whole heap of little businesses. So it was a steep learning curve at the time, but sort of that was 25 years ago now. So every year I learn more things, and it just grows and grows and grows, and allows us to share that knowledge through the business that we have now.
You actually have that unique perspective of seeing both what the landlord wants and what the landlord needs, and what the tenant wants and what the tenant needs, and what levers to pull for both.
That's correct.
And that sort of leads us to the, negotiating part of our talk today, which is, how do you negotiate with your landlord? What's the first thing you need to do when negotiating a lease?
Well, look, I mean, the first thing that any business needs to do when they're negotiating a lease is to actually understand the market that they're in. What is actually happening around them? Is there a lot of vacancy around them? Is there a lot of movement in terms of tenancies coming and going? Is the asset being sold? What are the neighbouring tenancies being leased for if somebody new's just recently moved in? Or what are if neighbouring tenants have got lease expiries coming up, what sort of rent is the landlord asking for? What's the market conditions that you're in, and understanding the market that you're in and the kind of value that your tenancy has in the market. Because the first thing, you need to understand that, because the landlord's going to come to you and ask you for a rent increase, because that's what they are innately trained, or that's what they do every time. So the first thing to understand is where you actually sit in the market, so you can kind of go, okay, can I actually afford to stay in this market? This is where I'm at. So you can it helps you understand your own position, so you can think about the future and what the best outcome might be when you're negotiating the lease.
How do you find that information out? So you're saying, do your research, your neighbours. Would you just go to your neighbour and knock on the door and say, hi, how much is your rent?
Yeah, I mean, it's amazing how much information is available publicly. I mean, every lease that's registered on a title, for example, is available for anyone to download. You pay a small fee and you can download a lease. So if you want to know how much the neighbouring tenant is paying, you can get a copy of their lease and find out. Or you could just ask them. I mean, people are pretty willing to share information, because tenants like to band together and share information to help each other, because it helps everyone to share that information. So you'd be surprised about how much information that you can actually gather just by asking the question. As long as you're obviously polite and those kinds of things, people are generally pretty forthcoming with that information. Or speaking to a local real estate agent, or other sort of stakeholders in the area who you might know, who you can sort of say, you see a tenancy that's recently leased or for lease now, and finding out from the agent how much is it. They might say, oh, it's already been leased. Okay, well, how much did that go for by out of interest? What was the going rate on that, and was it? And they'll tell you, because it's interesting for them to share the information as well, because there's an opportunity for them to get some information from you. And so there's a lot of information shared. It's quite an open sort of conversation, so you can gather that information by asking the right questions.
Wow. I hadn't even thought that somebody would be so forthcoming, or even that there was a place that you can download leases. That's really interesting information. So let's say you've done that step and you now understand where you sit in the market. What is the next thing you do? What's the next step after that?
So once you understand where the market is and where you currently sit in the market in terms of what's your current rent, where does that sit in terms of, are you paying way under what everyone else is paying around you, or are you paying way too much? I guess then you need to work out what things are important to you. For most people, rent is one of the most important things, but it's not always the most important thing. I mean, for some people, it's the term of the lease. It's them wanting to make sure that they can secure that premises for a certain amount of time. For others, it's about getting a new fit out. I really need to get a new fit out. So that's actually the most important thing for me. Others are a new business, or they're fairly young in the business and they want to, or the business may not be going quite as well as they'd hope potentially. So they want more flexibility in the lease. So it all really depends on the age and stage of the business and what your plans are for the future. But what you need to work at that point are what are the most important things to you as a tenant, and because those are the things that you need to figure out what are my absolute must-haves. And once you've worked out those, then it helps you make quicker decisions when the landlord comes to you with something. If the landlord says, listen, we are only interested in signing a 10-year lease, when you're a business which is kind of at an early stage or thinking, you know what, this premises is going to be too small for me quite soon, then you're going to immediately know, well, you know, I already know that's actually not going to fit for us, because that's actually what's not important to me. It's not actually about the rent. It's about having flexibility to grow. You know, so each business has different things that are important to them. And you need to really sort of sit down and figure out what those things are, so that when the landlord does come to you, you know, you can line up what they're offering you and what you need to make sure that it's right for your business.
Makes sense. But in that process, we're thinking about what's important to us. But likewise, is it really important to understand what the landlord's needs are as well, and the motivations as part of that negotiation process?
Yeah, it is important, because the landlord will behave in a different way depending on what the outcome is for them. Like, for example, if the landlord is selling the asset, like if the landlord's got the asset on the market or is planning to sell the asset in the next short while, then they're more likely to be more generous in their negotiations, because for example, a building is valued based on the rental of each of the tenancies. So if the tenancy is vacant, it'll be valued at X amount. If it's tenanted by someone on a long lease, then it will be valued at Y. So they want to secure you as a tenant because it's more valuable to them. The value of the asset will increase if the tenant is locked into a lease. So if they're planning to sell the asset soon, they'll be looking to lock in a deal, and they can potentially provide you with some cash or incentive money or works or rent-free or incentives to induce a better deal, because it's actually in the long term going to gain them, you know, more money when they sell the asset. So if you find out that they're selling, then you know that there's more on the table, because it's more important for them to have you sign a lease than it is to walk away, because that's a problem for them if they're selling the asset. Equally, if they've just bought the asset, that's also important to know, because if they've just bought the asset, they will have bought it based on a certain rent coming out of that tenancy, and therefore they will be very reluctant to negotiate a rent which is lower than what they've effectively just paid for. So there might be other things that you can negotiate. They'll want the rent to stay as close to the valuation that they were paid for the asset based on. So the rent will be something they may not negotiate on, but they may negotiate on other clauses like rent reviews or cash contributions or rent-free or other things. So really it does make a difference, because depending on the age and stage of the investor who owns the asset as well, you know, if they're looking for someone who's long-term, then they're more likely to offer you a better deal. If they're looking to sell, they're going to offer you a better deal. So it really is, if you can understand the landlord's motivations and where they are at in, you know, their cycle for the asset, that can really help you understand the best way to close the deal as well.
The Aesthetic and Beauty Industry Council is Australia's peak industry body, representing the collective professional beauty and aesthetic, salon, clinic and spa community. Created for the industry, by the industry, our council is a collaboration of industry leaders who bring their commitment and specialised skills to raise industry standards, guide regulation and be a strong voice to government. At ABIC, our purpose is to provide an accessible and supportive organisation for the betterment of the professional beauty and aesthetic field, to enhance working practices and promote unity across the various sectors of the industry. ABIC's mission also includes being a trusted source of referral, education and guidance for clients of the beauty and aesthetic profession. ABIC is here to support our members through an extensive offering, including hundreds of valuable resources, HR support and industry expert facilitators to ensure your continued growth and success. Join us today, and together let's safeguard the future of the beauty and aesthetic industry. Find us at www.theabic.org.au. At ABIC, we are here for you. There's so many moving parts, isn't there, to keep track of?
Yeah, there is. There's a lot of moving parts, and that's why it's quite it can be quite daunting sometimes. But you can, gather the information slowly, and that's why we always recommend as well people allow plenty of time to, start talking about it 6 months before, because there is a lot of research to do and work to do before you need to kind of rush into the crunching of the numbers.
I think a lot of people, I know myself, tenants, delay that process because it is quite daunting speaking to a landlord. You've got, your premises there is at stake, and you don't really want to do anything wrong if you want to stay there. You don't want to upset the landlord, but at the same time, you might be suffering under the burden of maybe an overinflated rental amount, and you don't know where to go. So it's so important that you have resources such as yourself. There's a wealth of knowledge and can also make that process much less stressful. So if you've got all the information that you need to negotiate the deal, what do you do next?
So now you've worked out where you sit in the market, you kind of understand where your rent is currently in terms of, up or down from your neighbouring tenants or comparable tenancies near you. You've got a bit of an idea as to where the landlord sits and what he's motivated by. Then you can put together an offer for the landlord. I mean, often what happens is the landlord will provide you an offer, and that's okay, but often the landlord's offer will only provide you with 3 or 4 points, and they'll sort of say, here's the rent, the length of the lease, and the rent reviews, for example. Whereas we would always say, when you're putting together an offer for the landlord, cover all the things that you can think of. There's sort of 10 to 15 things that we like to negotiate every time, because you've got to make sure when you're negotiating anything, in particular a lease, that there are things on your list that you want of your unnegotiable points that you're prepared to give away, right? Because you need to leave room to negotiate. So if there's only 3 points on your list, then, and they say no to all 3, you've kind of got nothing else to kind of talk about. You need to make sure there's 10 to 15 things that you can talk about. I mean, you're talking about the rent. Yes, you're talking about the length of the lease and the reviews, but you also need to talk about rent-free. You also need to talk about what's the security on the lease. Is there a bank guarantee? Do they need me to pay some kind of security deposit? Who's going to pay the legal fees for the preparation of this lease? What fit-out works do they want me to do on this lease? Are they going to allow that to be rent-free while I'm closed doing my fit-out? Is there any car parking? Can I get extra signage? There's a whole bunch of things that we can add in, and some of those things are not really that important, but what's important is you've got a whole list of things so that when the landlord won't agree to some, they will agree to others, and you will kind of work out which things are most important, which things you can give away. But you need to have some things that you're prepared to give away, leaving you some room to negotiate. So you wouldn't put your best offer up first, and you'd never say to a landlord, listen, this is my take it or leave it position, because you are trying to engage in a conversation with the landlord where you are showing them that you're looking to work together with them, you're looking to partner with them, and this is in both of your best interest to try and reach an agreement. Like we always say something like, we understand, here's our points, but we understand that, look, all of these points are not going to work for you, but we're keen to hear your thoughts and see if we can create something that works for both of us using these points as a starting framework. So that it kind of says, look, this is where we'd like to see it. On the inside, we know that we're not going to get that deal, but we want to get as close to that as possible. And we also know that we are able to give some of those things away, but we're also saying, and so we're not sort of saying, this is our offer, take it or leave it. We're sort of opening up the conversation, because your offer is really just a conversation starter as an invitation to the landlord to negotiate with you. And you start having a conversation back and forth, because people come unstuck where they kind of put their best foot forward and then the landlord won't agree to it, and they kind of go, I don't know where to go now, because they haven't left themselves, any room. So that's why we put in as many things as we can think of, because you can give some away and then you can sort of say, well, okay, well, I've given up the car parks that I really, really wanted, when on the inside they may not have been that critical to you. So I need you now, Mr. Landlord, to give up a bit on this, whatever the other thing is, which is something that's more important to you. So you've got to have a big list of things, as many things as you can think of, and be putting it forward to them in the kind of presentation that, look, these are all of our things that we'd love. We know they're not going to all work for you. There's a lot of moving parts here, but we're really keen to hear your feedback on these points, and hopefully we can work together to create something that works for both of us. And, we're looking for a deal that looks something like this, rather than here's our deal. You've got to be open to the feedback, and you've got to be open to moving on your offer, because that's what they're expecting you to do. They're not expecting you to say no, yes or no. People often say, well, the landlord's given me an offer and I can't agree to it. I said, yeah, but it's a negotiation. They're expecting there to be a conversation back and forward. They're not just giving you the offer and saying it's yes or no. It's a discussion. And so you're trying to be as friendly as you can, because you want them to be as engaged with you as you can, to try and get the best outcome for you, and figure out of all those points that you've raised, which ones are actually important, and get as close to what you need on those ones, whilst giving up some of the other points.
It really, listening to all these things, it makes perfect sense, but there are a lot of things to consider. So give yourself space and a little bit more room to negotiate. Have some levers, have an extra long list of things that you need. Be friendly and be open to conversation, basically, and open to negotiation. Yeah. Okay, yeah. Got it. It's a lot of moving parts, as we said. So now we're up to this stage where we're in the negotiation process. How do you actually move from, these list of things and that negotiation process to actually closing the deal?
Well, you need to win. Like I mentioned before, you've got a list of things. You've made maybe a list of 10 or 12, 15 things. You need to work out what's your minimum and maximum position on each of those things. Like, what is that really important to you? That's why it's important to throw in things that really don't matter, that you can kind of give away, right? So you're going, okay, well, these are the things that are really important to me. And in this case, it might be the rent. It might be a 2-year lease, might be no personal guarantees on the lease, right? Those are the 3 things that are actual deal breakers for me. The rest are not really going to matter up or down either way. So you've got to be able to identify out of those things what are the most important. And then it's just a matter of actually giving a little each time. So the negotiation with the landlord might take 3 or 4 conversations, but you're going to put forward your offer. They're going to respond. And the key is to not go hardball and say, you guys haven't moved on anything. I'm not going to move on anything, because that will you won't close the deal. You will just sit there in a stalemate, and then you'll both be frustrated with each other, and that's not going to help the engagement between the 2 parties. So really working out what your minimum and maximum position is of what you can accept, so that you can consider the landlord's response alongside those markers. And then because the landlord also needs to feel like they've got to win as well. So by you saying, you know what, okay, I concede, I'm not going to push for that point, but I am going to push for this. So each time you speak to them, you're giving them a little bit more, and that way they're feeling like they've got to win, a little bit of a win each time, and there's a bit of movement. And then you gradually, after 3 or 4 conversations, you'll get to a point where both of you are satisfied with the outcome. And then you can they'll ask you for some things, and you'll say, yeah, I can agree to that if you can agree to this. And you'll work through those points without compromising, obviously, the things that are super important to your business, because you know what the number is that you need it to be, and might give away some other things in order to get that. But each time you go back to the landlord, you need to give a little back to them, because they need to feel like they're a win as well. The last thing they like, we often feel like we've had a huge win and the landlord often does too, but on the inside we're going, you know what, I think we won that deal. But the way that you go through that little game of, it's like a dance, you take a step and they take a step, and how you actually work through that is how everybody comes out feeling like they've been the winner in that deal.
So a successful deal means that each party feels like they've secretly won.
Yeah.
That's the key, is it?
That's right, because you've worked out the 3 things that are most important to you and you've managed to secure those things. The landlord's managed to get you to, concede on 10 other things. So they think they've got to win because you've conceded on 10 things, when in fact those 10 things weren't actually deal breakers for you anyway. The 3 things that you really needed for your business you've got. So everybody's a winner then, right? They're happy and you're happy and you'll close out the deal. And then you'll agree in writing that that's the deal. And then, the documents will be drawn up.
In COVID, so this is a bit of a question from the left. In COVID, we had many situations where we were dealing with our landlords and it didn't turn out so great. I know I was actually, one of my businesses happened where I actually had to go into a mediation. And so what happens to recover a relationship? So let's say you're an actual tenant that has been in a premises for a long time. How can you recover a relationship that, probably has gone a little bit south?
Look, I think it's really just time and continuing to be a diligent tenant, paying on time and doing all the right things, because no one likes being in a conflict of any kind, whether it's a mediation or just a heated discussion, right? Because everyone feels a little bit uncomfortable and doesn't like the other person in that moment. So it's then just a matter of letting time go, and during that time making sure that you're as nice as possible, that you're paying your rent on time, and that you're doing all the things that you've agreed to do. Because ultimately, even if you've reached an arrangement, at some point your lease is going to expire and you're going to need to have another conversation with that person. So it's really important to try and continue as professionally as possible, and continue to, be upfront and honest with them, communicate with them a lot, and thank them for their assistance, even though it may not have been the total assistance that you might have wanted at that time, to thank them for their support during that time, because and acknowledge that it was tough for them as well. It was tough for everybody, right? So there were situations where both parties were unhappy and had, but it's tough for everybody. And I think it's just that empathy of showing the landlord, and look, time is a great healer for that, but being empathetic towards the fact that it was difficult for them too. And I think that's the only way. And sometimes the relationship can't be repaired, but I think that's for the best chance of it being repaired, because you do want to engage with them in the future, potentially to renegotiate the next lease or, have another conversation about something. You need to be able to have a base relationship where there's respect between the parties, and a common understanding of, that you're both in this to try and work together.
Well, Kelly, thank you so much for that amazing session. If anybody has any questions for you, how can they reach out to you?
They can phone me. My phone number is 0419 001 093, or you can email me. My email is Kelly, Kelly, at yourleasingco.com.au, or through the website. We've got an inquiries page through the website. Feel free to reach out to me at any time through any of those mediums at all.
It's been a pleasure chatting with you today, Kelly, and we really can't wait to have you back on our podcast again very soon. Thank you so much. You've reached the end of another episode of the Beauty by ABIC podcast, your online support community for the aesthetic and beauty industry. Thank you for listening, and until next time, stay connected.